Two enduro bikes, very similar in travel, very similar in geometry. The only real difference is the wheel size. So which one's best? Hi, I'm John from Off.road.cc, and I reckon we've been getting it wrong about wheels. Okay, so on my left I have a 2018 Mondraker Foxy. It's got 650B wheels, shod in 2.5 inch tyres. At the back there's 150mm of travel, at the front 160. On my right I've got a Mondraker Super Foxy. It's got 10mm more travel at the front, 170mm, and 10mm more at the back, 160mm. Now, although these bikes share very similar geometry, they ride very, very differently, and I get along with one of them an awful lot better than the other. Riding both of these bikes back to back has made me think that the question of which wheel size is best isn't really that easy to answer. So, first of all, we should probably tackle some slight myths about 29ers versus 650B bikes. A commonly held one is that the bigger wheel, it rolls better, and people generally put this down to the different angle of attack. So obviously you've got your flat surface there, you've got a bump there, and you'd thought a bigger diameter wheel, obviously it hits it at a flatter angle, therefore it's going to transmit less bump to you. Obviously smaller wheel, it's going to hit it like that. It's the difference between, say, riding into a curb or, riding into something this high. That's going to be different. However, if you do the maths with this, the actual differences really aren't that big. For any bump up until about, 100mm or so high, which is, when you realistically think about it, probably about the maximum that you're going to do, that you're just going to ride the bike straight into, there really isn't much difference in the angle of attack. Okay, the 29er is slightly less, but we're talking in the region of sort of like 2 to 3%, and that's the difference of that angle of attack. If you extrapolate that outwards, then at its maximum, say at a 100mm bump, the difference in bump force really isn't huge. So the difference in upwards bump force that comes at about 2.7%, and the difference in rearward bump force maybe about 5%. So that is potentially something that you could feel out on the trail, and maybe if you're riding like a very long, super rough descent, that would start to build into it. However, I think there are bigger things at play in how fast you will be able to ride one of these bikes, say a 29er or a 650B bike. Basically, I think we've been getting it all wrong, and the bike you're going to be fastest on doesn't matter about the wheel size, it's the bike that fits you best. So, both of these bikes are mediums. I'm about 172 centimetres tall, about 5'8"-ish, and I get on a lot better with this 650B bike. I've been trying to wrap my head around it, so I've kind of crunched all the numbers, I've measured both of these bikes up, and they are very, very, very similar. So the reach on this is about 475, the reach on this is 465, 10mm difference, not massive. Chainstays on that, those are 445, these are 430. I think that is something that I can actually feel, and something that I kind of prefer the shorter chainstay. You may different. In terms of head angle, this runs at 64 degrees with some angle cups in it, and this at 65. In terms of the actual ground trail, so the difference that's making on the ground, it really isn't much. There's about, I think about 3mm in it, which obviously isn't very much. So I think the real difference in how well I get on with these two bikes is more to do with my height and also the bar height of the bike. So the major difference between these two bikes is that although I don't have this stem fully as low as it'll go, it is still around 60mm lower than this bar, which is as low as it'd go. And even if I was to get a flat bar, I couldn't drop it that much. And I think this is the big difference that I'm feeling. Of course, this also depends on the kind of trails that you ride. So I live here in the woods, and there's lots of tight, twisty, woodsy stuff. Some of it's pretty steep. It's never actually hugely rocky, although there are some fairly chunky trails around. That means that I find it much easier to get this bike leant over and turn through things, which is why I think I enjoy it a lot more. Combine that with a slightly shorter back end, it means I can kind of weave it around things much better, and I found it much easier to hustle this at speed, despite the chat that a 29er is always faster. I think, well, maybe in certain situations. If you're going to ride somewhere that's like super rocky all the time, then yeah, maybe those slight differences in the angle of attack, maybe the 29 would have an edge. For me, I like riding tight, twisty stuff that's fairly steep, and That's another downside of a 29 for me. Because that rear wheel is bigger, obviously once you tip it forwards that much, I'm more likely to buzz my bum with the back of that tyre. With that, I can get further over the back, generally feel more confident and feel like the wheel is getting in my way less. So this is why I think you should always take it with a pinch of salt when people go like, 29ers are better, 650B bikes are better. I think you need to figure out what you're going to be doing with the bike, what size and what kind of rider and what style of rider you are, and then try and decide on all those variables as to which bike is going to suit you best. For me, I like a tight, twisty, light trail. I like quite an agile bike, and that delivers that. This bike, yeah, maybe if you're ploughing over big rocks, doing big super enduro trails where, you know, that slight difference in the amount of bump force it's transmitting to your hand, yeah, that would make a difference. But of course then you do have other issues that your longer fork is more likely to bend. If it bends, it binds. So who knows how much of that force is actually going to be different in reality. The other thing, of course, is that 29er wheels, and in fact 29er bikes, are simply going to be slightly heavier by the virtue of there's more wheel, you need more fork, and you need a longer back end to fit all that in. That maybe doesn't make a huge difference, and I do think that a lot of the difference between weight in terms of like how fast it spins up and everything like that doesn't actually a huge issue between the two things. Maybe if you're running like super heavy duty encasing tyres, but obviously that difference starts to increase more and more as you stick a thicker and chunkier tyre on. But I think for most people, the amount of inertia in the wheel isn't making a huge difference to how fast that bike accelerates, stops, or does anything like that. I think occasionally you'll feel that because of the gyroscopic precession in there. Obviously, a heavier wheel feels like it'll be harder to turn offline, especially around speed, which is why I think a lot of people say like, oh, this 29er rolls so much better, it feels so much better through rocks. Well, it's probably because just that wheel spinning out of that gyroscopic precession means that it's less likely to get bumped offline, so you're going to feel that through the bars. Will it make a difference to your time? I don't really know. I will obviously caveat all this by saying that this is not a scientific test. I've not ridden these bikes. Well, I have ridden these bikes back to back, but not with the same tyres, not with a stopwatch, and never with enough consistency to go like, this is faster here, this is faster there. I will say that on trails where I feel like I'm happiest on this bike, I am generally faster on it as opposed to this one. But of course, you ride your own preference, and I think that's what people need to get used to is the fastest bike is going to be the one that you're happiest on. So I know that this chat isn't really bringing anything new to the age-old debate of 29er versus 650, but I think it should give you a little bit of food for thought. I think you really need to think about what sort of riding you do, where you ride, what you like, and also how tall you are. In summary, I really think that we need to stop worrying about wheel size and which wheel size is best so much. Best is subjective, and we as journalists and everyone else as riders sometimes forgets that, but what is best for one person is not necessarily best for the other. If you're 6'5", then yeah, maybe a bike like this isn't going to suit you. That front end height is going to be too low, and maybe you'd prefer a longer back end. And vice versa, if you're 5'2", then a 29er is probably going to have a ridiculously high bar height relative to where you need it to be. So I think when you're looking at picking a bike, think about what sort of riding do you do? Do you like kind of fast, bumpy, rocky stuff? In that case, maybe think about a 29er. There might be benefits there in terms of the way they handle bumps. Probably won't be life-changing, but there might be there. Again, like if you like tight, twisty things or a bit shorter, there's nothing wrong with 650B. I really don't think you're going to be slower on a 650B bike if it fits you well, and that means you can ride it harder. Well, that's not really ended the debate, but I hope it gives you something to chat about. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and yeah, if you've got any other thoughts about the whole 29 versus 650B, what's best, what's not best, or just what you prefer, then let us know in the comments. If you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more stuff like this, then please subscribe to our channel. Cheers, bye-bye.